So in this video, we're going to talk about Vectorizer versus Upscaler. What are the pros and the cons of each of these tools, and when should you be using them, essentially? And I think a lot of people are confused about this, and it's not actually as difficult as you might think. So first of all, before I go into the pros and cons of both vectorizers and upscalers, I wanted to give you a general idea of what's actually going on with these tools. The goal is, in both cases, no matter which one of the two you're using, to increase quality. Because of AI art generators, we have a lot of low resolution images now that are sort of rendered at around 1,000 pixels. They don't look great. They're very pixelated. If you want to print them on a t-shirt or anything bigger than a tiny sticker, basically, they're going to look bad. That's why vectorizers and upscalers are out there, or why they're being used a lot now, right? So the goal is, with both of them, to increase quality. Both of them do the job pretty well. You can use either one in most cases. You do not have to use both. That would be a bit overkill. You can use both, but I feel like it's a bit pointless. However, there is certain scenarios where Vectorizer might be more applicable. There is other scenarios when Upscaler might be more applicable. And it also has to do with your personal situation. How do you create designs? How do you want to edit the files afterwards? What are you more familiar with? I'm going to go through a lot of different notes right here that I want to address. First of all, we're going to talk about vectorizers, and I think I need to mention what a vector actually is for you to understand this, because I think not everyone knows this. So we've got essentially two different types of files. We've got raster images and we've got vector files. Raster means it's made up of pixels. So these would be PNG files or JPEG files. And if you zoom in on these, you will eventually start seeing pixels. That's what they're made out of. If you imagine printing these pictures at a large scale, then you will see the pixels. You will see the low quality in a sense if you print them too large. However, vectors, on the other hand, they are not made up of pixels. They are essentially a combination of paths and different points, right, that make up a design. They show you the path instead of the pixels. And you can test this with any vector file, like an SVG file. You can open it up in a free vector editing tool, such as Figma or Inkscape, and zoom into the design. You will not see pixels. You will see a smooth line, even if you fully zoomed in. That is the difference between the two. They're also aesthetically different in a sense, but we're going to go into that. So first of all, what are the pros and cons of a vectorizer? So the most obvious pro of using a vectorizer is that it creates files that are infinitely scalable. I say this all the time, but essentially, once you've got a vector, you can just quickly increase the size to whatever you want, and you're not going to lose out on quality. Whereas if you've upscaled an image, it is still constrained to its pixel dimensions, and you still have to watch out. You can't make it too big because it might still turn out blurry in the print. So with a vectorizer, I do realize we eventually export the files in a PNG format, and it will obviously get printed in that sort of format. However, it's just easier to work with in a design process if you don't have to worry about the limitation with raster images. So infinitely scalable, that's a massive pro of using vectors. Now, the second thing is you actually get access to vector editing capabilities. If you've only got an image from an upscaler, then it is a different process to go about changing things with that image. You can obviously modify it with apps like Photoshop, but if you have a vector, in my opinion, you kind of have opened up a new door, because you can edit all the different shapes, you can change the colors more easily, you can use many different tools and processes that you wouldn't really be able to access if you're just using a plain raster image. So the vector editing capabilities are a massive pro, and you don't even need Adobe Illustrator for this. Like I said, there is Figma, there is Inkscape, there is free tools, free alternatives to Adobe Illustrator to take advantage of these vector editing capabilities. Another bonus is, once you've got a vector file, you can turn this file into pretty much any other file type. So if you wanted to sell your designs as digital art, for example, you could sell them as SVG, EPS, PDF, JPEG, PNG, like so many different files you can quickly create from a vector. Whereas if you're starting off with a JPEG or a PNG, you can't go the other way. You do have to vectorize first. That is another bonus of starting out with a vector or using a vectorizer. You also have the bonus or the benefit of having a very small file size. So if you've ever used an upscaler and then a vectorizer straight afterwards for the same image, you might have noticed that the upscaled image is way bigger in terms of its, megabytes than the vector itself. And even if you open up the vector in a in an image editing tool and you save it at the same sorts of dimensions, you should have a smaller file in most cases. At least that's what my experience has been. So I do think the sort of lower file size is definitely another pro of using a vectorizer. And a few things that vectorizers are very suitable for when it comes to the sorts of AI graphics that you're using is, first of all, flat illustrations, 2D stuff, something that looks like a cartoon or vector art, you know, stuff that looks like it's digitally created and that is more simplistic. That is where vectors really shine, in my opinion, or vectorizers, right? We often see these sorts of graphics on t-shirt designs. That's why I'm always or most often using vectorizers myself, because I do design t-shirts. However, not all images are equal. So if you've got a very detailed photographic image, then a vector is not going to do a great job. It's going to ruin the detail and make it look very flat and simplistic, which in some cases you just don't want. So do remember, it is better for more simplistic, flat illustrations that have a digital feel to them. So some of the cons of using vectorizers, I kind of alluded to one right there, that it doesn't work well for photographs, but another con is that it ruins gradients. So all of the vectorizers that I've used so far, if you've got a gradient within the image, like it fades from orange to yellow, it will break up that gradient into multiple sections. It will not create a smooth gradient that is sort of fading from one color to the other, which is possible with vectors. I don't know why that happens. I guess the vectorizer tools are not as advanced yet to be able to create gradients. I'm sure that's probably going to come around eventually, but if you do use a lot of gradients and you don't want them to be ruined, then that is definitely a downside to using a vectorizer. Also, a small downside is you do have to often turn the vectors back into PNG, because most print-on-demand platforms actually don't really allow vector files for upload. I think you can do it on Printify, but you know, in most cases you're going to have a PNG. So the vector is actually, in that case, more like the vessel, the step in between low resolution image and the final high quality PNG. It's sort of the middle step that you're using to enhance or upscale the quality. I mean, it adds one little step, which is a bit of a con. Another downside is that vectors are not great for seamless patterns, because I have noticed with the vectorizers, they often sort of mess up that seamless edge. You will notice if you try and, you know, match up the patterns afterwards, that the shapes are kind of out of place, and the vector, again, it simplifies a lot of the areas, and therefore it doesn't look very accurate when you actually put the seams together with these patterns. So that is one of the downsides of using a vectorizer, is that it doesn't really work that well for pattern designs. Let's move on to the upscalers then. Essentially what these do is they take your low pixel raster image and they turn it into a high pixel raster image. So it might go from 1000 to like 4000 pixels. And at the same time, the upscaler is also enhancing the quality, making the image look sharper, and it will print better in the end, right? That is the main goal in most cases. So the pros of using an upscaler is the result stays closer to the original aesthetic of the image. Vectorizers, like I said, they kind of obscure the style a bit, and whilst it might work well in some scenarios with some art styles, in most cases upscalers are going to stay a lot closer to the original and give you a more accurate result in a sense. So that is why they are more suited for photography, for more intricate art, more detailed design work, and that is what we see a lot with AI art generators. So that's why upscalers definitely have a valid place out there. Some of the other pros are essentially just, you know, reversing some of the cons of a vectorizer, and that is upscalers are great for patterns, because that way you kind of maintain that seamlessness if you're using seamless patterns. So that is a pro of using an upscaler, as well as they stick to gradients. So they will actually keep a gradient more intact and actually make it look even more detailed in a sense. So you do not lose gradients if you work with gradients a lot. That is a massive pro of using upscalers. If we move on to the cons, however, there is a few extra things right here that you might want to consider. And obviously, these also kind of depend on the quality of your upscaler that you're using, so they might not always apply, and it also depends on what sort of source image you're using. If it's really, really bad quality, then, you know, your results are going to be worse, but you can possibly get some ghosting. What I mean by this is around the edges of your graphics, you will have like, you know, ghosting effect, meaning it sort of looks a bit foggy, shiny. I'll show examples of this on the screen, which you don't really tend to get as much with vectorizers. This is a very raster imagey sort of effect. You also have more grain, because if you're upscaling this, you're making things more crisp. With the sharpness often comes grain, which in a vector you wouldn't really have, because a vector you have like one color shapes, right? One straight color. With a raster image, you have lots and lots of different miniature pixels that are essentially forming different colors, and that often has the effect of grain. I've noticed this if I'm comparing two results of vector to upscaler, that sometimes the upscaled images look a bit grainy in comparison. Then there's obviously the downside of not having vector editing capability. So, and this totally depends on what you're used to. So if you always use Photoshop anyway, then it probably won't bother you, right? You'll be happy with having a PNG, a JPEG to work with. If you are really into like Adobe Illustrator, Figma, whatever it might be, then always using an upscaler might limit you quite a bit with those tools, because you're used to, you know, messing around with a pen tool, direct selection, all of these different things, which don't really help you out if you have a JPEG file or a PNG file inside of Adobe Illustrator. So another thing that's worth mentioning here is that oftentimes the free upscalers are quite limited in terms of you can't really increase the size as much as you might like to do. So I think most of them, they stop at 4x, right? So that means you're going to get to about 4,000 pixels. I think ideally you'd want to be a bit higher than that for t-shirts or many print-on-demand products, like 5,000-6,000 pixels maybe, hopefully, is what you'd want to reach. So that is a little bit of a downside, I think, for these upscalers if you're using the free ones. Obviously with Upscale, I'm pretty sure you can go higher than that. You can use the double upscale function, and there will be paid tools like Gigapixel Topaz where you can just increase the quality way higher. But yeah, free ones are often quite limited, which is a bit of a downside. And another downside is the large file size, which I've definitely noticed. Like oftentimes these upscalers put out files that are like 20 megabytes, 30 megabytes, and that's so massive to work with. First of all, it'll slow down your design tool, and if you're saving it such a large 30 megabyte file, then some marketplaces won't even accept your design, which is really unfortunate, because they do have some like maximum limit set sometimes for like 10 or 15 MB. So yeah, upscalers do create very massive files, definitely a downside. So to sum it up, both vectorizers and upscalers do a great job at increasing the quality of our low resolution AI art. Both of them have their ups and downsides. However, you don't have to worry about it too much. Just try them both, see which one works better for you. If you're working with vectors a lot and that's what you're into, use a vectorizer. If you're often working with photography, with Photoshop, photo editing tools, then just use an upscaler. It just depends on your situation. It depends on what sorts of art you're using. So think about it, try out both options, whatever works best for you, whatever increases the quality enough will do the job. If you want to see me compare 4 of the best free AI image upscalers out there, make sure to check out this video next. I also show you how to use each upscaler so you can try them out for yourself.